Hi everyone, I'm Voltaire. Thank you, Dr. Grove, for this nice introduction. Yes, this article we are going to talk about today is very interesting. And since I'm going to supposed to do it for like 40 minutes, so I do have some interactive elements in my presentation. I hope everyone can go on this thinking process or thinking journey with me while we are reading through this article together. So just to do a quick check, if everyone can hear me, could you type yes in the chat box? Because the chat box will be using throughout the session. And while everyone is typing, thank you everyone. Thank you so much. So the article we are going to talk about today is collection and analysis of adherence information for software as a medical device clinical trials. And this study is actually a systematic review. So here comes the introduction. Before we talked about the background of this research and why it has importance and its application, I would like to ask everyone a question. I would like to ask everyone a question that is, why do adherence and engagement of clinical trial participant matters for a digital health app? Like we know the adherence for medication is very important, but why isn't using a healthcare app or like a digital app is important for this for a clinical trial? So you don't have to answer it right now. I know it's going to be an extensive session, so I'll ask you guys again this question later. But for now, just listen to my introduction about why the author wants to do this study, and maybe you'll get some hints why this is important. So for the background, when the article was published in 2023, and by that time, by the time that they carried out the study, there were 350,000 health-related apps. So it's health-related apps, but so it's apps that feature some health function or health benefit, but only a small fraction of those apps are subject to FDA regulation. And the risk and benefit of health-related apps actually depends on how people use it, especially for those apps that are engaging everyday patients' everyday life. So compared to the traditional, or not traditional, but more what people usually aware of is pharmaceutical clinical trial and digital health app. A clinical trial, the difference is that for pharmaceutical trials, they actually have something called intent to treat analysis to try to analyze how the drugs will be really used in the real world. Maybe people will be in compliance sometimes, and whether that will influence the efficacy and safety outcome. But for digital health app, there is actually some unknown risk of bias because we don't know whether the compliant, to what extent the compliance play a role in healthcare or health related apps. So the two questions the authors want to ask is, how well do researchers report adherence and engagement matrix in their clinical trials or studies? And what efficacy analysis do researchers use to account for non-adherence, and how appropriate are their methods? So those are the two questions the author want to answer. So in the title we talked about software as medical device. So here I think everyone today probably already very familiar with the definition of it because we do have other articles talking about it before in the journal club. But just a quick review or the definition of it. For INDRF, their definition is software intended to be used for one or more medical purpose that perform these purposes without being part of a hardware medical device. And authors summarize that in a very short definition: therapeutics intended to prevent, diagnose, and treat diseases. Therapeutics here means like a software or app. And the common regulatory pathway for those apps to be cleared for marketing or receiving approval from FDA is 510(k) pathway and de novo pathway. And also there are a lot of innovation method for reviewing and carry out a regulatory process on FDA side, which include the software pre-certification program. And there's something called excellence appraisal, which is making sure that the manufacturer or the company producing the apps itself are with good quality standard, and they can streamline the regulatory process along the way. And also there are FDA was trying to incorporate more real world evidence when they are considering approve or clear those apps to the market. So there are some other research or similar research before this study. So there is actually another systematic review. And in those review, they realized that 3/4 of the digital health app trials collect and report basic adherence information. So the basic adherence information, for example, are like the dropout rates of using the app, and 1/3 reporting 60% use. 60% use means that their engagement of using the app. And for the very few details on how adherence data were collected and were analyzed in those trials. So the reason why the author want to wrote or do the systematic review is to extend the previous work, but in more details. And they want to see how adherence and engagement information is collected, analyzed, and reported in the current trials they found for those health apps. So in order to clearly define the systematic reviews framework, they actually provide 3 different criteria or framework before they start the study. So the first is risk of bias framework. So they incorporate something called Cochrane ROB assessment version 2. In this assessment, the first 2 questions they ask is, was there non-adherence to the assigned intervention regimen that could have affected participants' outcome? If the answer is yes, they will ask another question is, was an appropriate analysis used to estimate the effect of adhering to the intervention? And besides that, I also add on adherence and engagement matrix. So here we have a definition of what adherence is and what engagement is in the author's in this article. So for adherence, it means how well the patient use the apps. And also engagement means how the patient really use the apps. And for the use part in the app, there are 3 phases to see it. The
But
first one
here,
is yes.
but here, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt you, but I have a few students reach out say they cannot log in to the session. Does anybody
Oh,
has anybody run into the same problem, and how do you overcome this issue?
Yeah, Professor, I have a trouble in logging. Actually, it's the result of this of the Zoom meeting. So I changed my internet to um.
What do you mean you change your internet?
I think it's like Wi-Fi trouble or something.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
use another one, and then I success. So I took a really long time, like 20 minutes to log in.
Yeah, that's true.
That
Sometimes
happened to me too.
sometimes the issue also is whether they use the guest Wi-Fi or the secured USC Wi-Fi. There's USC guest and USC Wi-Fi, and one of those, sometimes the guest one doesn't let you.
so that means the internet.
Yeah.
Okay, but the users, if they're logging from home, supposedly they're using the same internet. Uh, yeah, I received another email say still not working. So should I just suggest them to try different? If they are at home, is there an
Dr.
alternative
Ko,
Wi-Fi for them?
Dr. Ko, sorry. So I had the same problem and I changed it to my cellular data, like my mobile internet, like my cell phone, and it worked. It used to say that the server cannot find this website, like the Safari cannot find. So maybe they can change their browser or they can change their data, their internet, and then for sure they can log in.
Yes, me too. So I changed to my personal hotspots, so that work. But for the internet or Wi-Fi things, it didn't.
Oh, okay. So it's the same IP address, but use different server or different provider. Okay, I will let them know. Thank you all for your suggestions. Okay, Voltaire, sorry. So and you please continue.
Okay, thank you. I know the internet was a little bit weird because it took me several tries to log into, and I was using the USC guest internet. So, okay, let's jump back to the slide. So we were talking about adherence and engagement matrix. So when it comes to use of an app and how they are engaged and using the app or adhere to using the app, we can see the use of the app from three different phases, which is initiation, is like when the patients or the participants started to use the app, and implementation, how they use the app, and the persistent is how long they use the app. And there are also other confounders that clinical trial can consider or should consider as like the mechanism they use to measure people's compliance and to track people's compliance, and also the reminder system in apps. For instance, in some contraceptive app, they will send people emails as a notification when they don't log in their data on time. But in the real life, where in this, but this email is only for the clinical trial, so it's not built in the app. When when the apps are marketed, or when the app went onto the market, it doesn't really have this notification function to remind people to log in the data. So the compliance might be a little bit different because now you don't have the safety net to remind you to log in the data on time anymore. So the authors should also, or the researchers should also consider whether the notification or tracking function they are using is internally built in the app or externally notifying the participants. And also, I think everyone should remember the question, the two questions the author asked before carrying out the study. One is about the analysis of efficacy. So the author is very curious about how well does the trial fulfill the assumptions required by its efficacy analysis method. So there are three common estimates used to analyze efficacy and effectiveness, which is the average treatment effect, ATE, per protocol effect, and dose response effect. And to fulfill the assumption, there are several assumptions for these three estimates, which is consistency, positivity, ignorability, exclusion, restrictions, strong monotonicity, and the stable unit treatment value assumption. So we will see that consistency, positivity, and SUTVA are consistent, will be shown in the result. And we will talk about the definition of these assumptions and how author define whether these assumptions are fulfilled later on in the method part. So here is just a summary table about all those estimates and the corresponding assumptions they have. All right, here comes to the method part. So in order to answer all those questions the author wants to know and to inform the current clinical study scheme for the health apps. When I say health, just for everyone's information, when I say health app, it's just another way of saying SAND under this study. So for the method part, there are two different parts of how they carry out the study. The first part is screening. So what they are looking for when they are screening the clinical studies for SAND is that it has to be a patient-facing SAND, which means that this ASAND, the users are actually patients. They are not physicians or practitioners. They are the patient themselves. And they should be repeatedly used for at least 2 weeks, and they have to be FDA approved by March 2022. And during the screening, there are two different phases, or stages. So for stage one, they are looking into the product code on FDA's database that is related to SAND. The keywords they use to search for product codes include software, mobile, digital, and application. And for stage two, they started to collect documents regarding those product codes where the device or the medical software as medical device and those under those product codes. So they examine each registration supporting document, de novo decision summaries, and 510(k) decision summaries. And when they identify certain products, they also looked into clinicaltrials.gov, Medline, and product websites. They want to include all publications that evaluated the effectiveness or efficacy of the product. So, which means they include both randomized control trials and also observational studies. But they did not include pilot or feasibility studies for those products. And after screening, they started to do data extraction. So for data extraction, one reviewer will extract the data, and the other one will review the other one review the accuracy of those data. So for their data, in literature review, people often build a data extraction sheet to record the data they extracted. So for this study, they combined the Cochrane data collection form for intervention reviews, plus the adherence engagement matrix we mentioned before, and also the analysis of that advocacy for them to generate the outcome they want to see. And we talked about for an analysis of efficacy, there are different assumptions for different types of way to assess the efficacy. So, but some of them are really hard to be used or to define in the trials. So they have an alternative definition or the way to categorize whether a study fulfilled those assumptions. For example, the definition of positivity is that each participant has a non-zero chance of receiving the treatment, which means that everyone has a chance to receive the treatment. In this case, they define that if the trial had a control group, they fulfill the assumption of positivity. As for consistency, is that the treatment is clearly defined so that the measured outcome is equal to the potential outcome. So they have defined that they have if a trial had definition of treatment adherence that avoid hidden variation of treatment that might affect participants differently, then it would be deemed to have consistency or fulfilling consistency assumption when it comes to efficacy analysis. And as for SUTVA, it means that requires that there is no interference among study units, like patient and researchers. So then here, if it has no central clinical team, or if it had mechanism for reducing the risk of interaction between participants or between participants and the staff, then it will be deemed to fulfill SUTVA assumption. And there are also other confounders, as we had some example before. It is impossible to fully evaluate the assumption that there are no unmeasured confounders in a study. So as long as the trial or the study demonstrated awareness of the confounders, it will be deemed to consider the confounder in their studies. So here is a screenshot of the data extraction sheet they use, but it's just part of it. It's like a 10-page document. So it's just a screenshot of part of it, and the full extraction sheet can be found in their appendices. So before I know it has been 20 minutes so far. So I just want to take a break and ask everyone, so why do you think adherence and engagement of clinical trial participants matter for digital health apps? After you learn about the background of the study and also how they are going to do the research, do you think this is adherence or engagement is important for digital health app? Does anyone want to give it a try to engage with me? If so, can lift yourself on mute or raise your hand. All right. Okay. So the answer or the examples the author mentioned in this article is that the efficacy might be overestimated if adherence reflects neglected confounding factors. For example, like income and lifestyle factors. For instance, if an app is trying to help preeclampsia patients, and they found that, oh, actually the outcome is really good, but actually those people who comply the app they receive a better premium or a better healthcare. Then you will not see that. You will see that it's because people comply to the app, so they have better outcome. But maybe because those people who have time to use the app have a better lifestyle or they receive a better healthcare treatments. And on the contrary is that the efficacy and side effect might be underestimated if the participant barely use the app. And when we assume that the outcome will show when people are using the app constantly. So here comes to the results part of the study. So here is a Prisma diagram. It's a diagram usually to show the screening process and the outcome that authors collected in a lot of literature review. So when they identified product code, they actually found 301 product code after duplicates removed. And after that, they slowly narrowed down to identify 18 SAMD therapeutics. And after that, they go through a screening process to find available data online and to see whether they're available or they are eligible for their study. Eventually, they found there are 24 studies about the SAMD they want to look into, and there are 10 SAMD in those. So it's like 10 SAMD, but the total is 24 studies. So some SAMD, they might have multiple studies to show either efficacy or their clinical trial or to support their market clearance or approval. And here is this screenshot shows all the SAMD or the apps included in this study and the clinical trials or clinical studies under like those apps had. So they realized all software as medical device, which is patient facing, that's the premises of the study, they were all mobile apps. And the indication include irritable bowel syndrome, insomnia, substance use disorder, and attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder, and contraceptive use. And here is a summary of the trials or the studies included, or the trials included in this study. They found that there is actually an even mix of continual use and module-based apps. So continual use means that the patient has to continue to use the app throughout the whole trial. And the module-based app is that patient has a milestone they need to accomplish. Like I have to do this course or this app at this time to finish this module on time. Kind of like the Trojan learning or Trojan training thing that every one of us have went through. That's called module-based in this context. And they realized that 82% of the trial specify the recommended dose. When I first saw this, it was very confusing, like recommended dose. And in the sense of a health app is actually a frequency of using the app. And 64% of the trials were observational studies. So here is, I highlighted the part in the table that 82% has a recommended use. And there are 50% and 50% of the studies that are module-based and continual use. Okay. And as for the adherence matrix, there are among all the 21 studies, 23 of them collected information about app engagement. So let's dive deeper into engagement matrix, which is something the author wanted to see. So for engagement matrix here, they do not measure the prescribed use of the app in this table. So we can see that when we talked about the use of the app, we can look into initiation, implementation, and persistence. So we can see that only 2 reported initiation, 2 reported implementation, and 7 reported the persistent use of the app. So but considering the prescribed use of the app, for article study the product without prescribing how often to use the app. And among those 4 articles, 3 reported engagement matrix, even though they didn't talk about how often they should use the app. And 2 continual therapeutics are prescribed for app use initiation and implementation, but not persistence. So the author looked into details of how those articles describe adherence matrix. So for initiation, there are 4 different ways that is related to initiation. And for implementation, there are 9 definitions when it comes to the implementation in the articles. But the thing is that I only counted 8. I didn't know why the author said 9 and in their paragraphs to describe about this table. So that's a unresolved part. I was very confused when reading the study. And about persistence, there are only 2 different ways to describe persistence in the app in the studies. So we can see that study reported all prescribed phases, which is initiation, implementation, persistence of adherence. There were only 9 study reported all of that. So when it comes to non-adherence to the assigned intervention regimen, 4 articles out of 24 only reported engagement information. and they didn't mention the prescribed amount of app use, which is actually mentioned in the slides before here. Yeah. And 20 out of 24 reported the prescribed amount of use. And among these 20 articles, five of them actually report the outcome of adherence at or below the defined low adherence. And 12 of them reported some non-adherence, but they didn't have a clear definition of what is low adherence. And 3 of them did not report sufficient information about adherence to the prescribed phases of adherence to judge adherence. So those are for the engagement and adherence matrix. And now let's look into the efficacy estimates. So for efficacy estimates, there are like effectiveness estimates and efficacy estimates. I think in the previous journal club, we also talked a little bit about the differences between effectiveness and efficacy. So there were 20 studies used the average treatment effect to see the effectiveness estimate, and 11 of them pre-registered effectiveness analysis, like they pre-register how they are going to do these analysis. And 7 of them are actually randomized clinical trials. So we can see that RCT has higher pre-registration rate. As for efficacy estimate, we can also see that randomized clinical trial has a higher pre-registration rate as well. So we also mentioned previously about there are several assumptions like SUTVA, positivity, and consistency when it comes to efficacy analysis. So among all the articles they included, there are like 2 articles talked about use average treatment effect. And most of them fulfill the 3 assumptions: SUTVA, positivity, and consistency. But there's one article that is an observational study, and they lack of control conditions, so they did not fulfill the positivity assumption. And the author of that article adjusted one confounder without saying why and how it was chosen. And there are 9 articles doing per protocol effect. And there's something called complier average causal effect analysis. And one trial, this is actually one trial here, but it has 2 articles, so that's why they show out in this way. So this one trial used complier average causal effect analysis to see their efficacy, and they generated 2 articles. So it's the CAC, also called local ATE or LATE, and they provide evidence of meeting its assumption. And there are 3 articles used as treated analysis. So among those articles, one article defined the treatment loosely, so that's why it didn't meet the consistency assumption. And there are 5 studies used per protocol analysis. And one of them is a randomized clinical trial that fulfilled all the 3 assumptions. And 4 articles had no control cohort and did not account for any potential confounders of adherence. And there's also another 3 studies about dose response effect. So we can see there's one RCT here, and this paper corrected one confounder without saying how it was chosen, but because it's a RCT, so it also fulfilled the 3 criteria, including SUTVA, positivity, and consistency. So after the extensive introduction of the result they got, I want to ask everyone a question. Do you think the SAND studies in this review provide a coherent or consistent outputs? Like, do you think it's possible to pull every data together and do a meta-analysis, or will it be very hard because they have so many different definitions? Or is it actually a good idea to do a meta-analysis over that, even though they have a lot of different I think what I'm trying to say is that, do you think the outputs of all those 24 studies mentioned in this systematic review generate or provide a consistent way to see the outcome of a study? You can type your answer in the chat box if you think yes. I feel like the outcome or the outputs of all those 24 studies are very consistent, please type yes. If no, I don't feel like, no, I don't feel they're consistent at all. Julian said my guess not consistent. Anyone else? What do you think? Do you think those studies are pretty consistent, generate similar outcomes or no?
Well, yeah, I'll just say my answer. I was typing it away, but I'd say,
Okay.
I think the indication is what's important, and there are different indications, and so it's going to be challenging to pull the outcomes of the different indications. If you have the software that's being used for just this one indication and that's it, and then you have the same endpoints, yes, that would be much easier. But I'm not saying that it can't be done. It could be done, but it would be very challenging, and you would have to discuss that as a limitation that these devices are treating different indications, and it would be harder to pull like an overall result because of that.
I see. Thank you so much, Dr. Suka. Actually, that's one thing the author will mention in the discussion. Like the study, there are different indications for all the apps. So it's really hard for them to pull the data. And also they don't provide a similar framework to see or to look into efficacy or also the compliance under those frameworks. So that's actually a very huge problem. And let's see how the author of this article see this problem. So here comes the discussion part. So for the adherence matrix, trial and study reporting was inconsistent. Many trials did not report all the three phases of adherence. And trials use many different definitions of each phases. For example, like we talked about the three phases, and one of them was like 9 different definitions. And so it's very hard to compare them directly. And for some trials measure and analyze and report adherence in ways likely to produce estimates inconsistent with those experienced with actual use. So what does that mean? So the first thing is that the authors say not all adherence phases were reported. Only a minority, which is 9 out of 20, reported all prescribed adherence phases, which is initiation, implementation, and persistence. And studies often report persistence solely in terms of study dropout. So for example, they only say, okay, certain percentage of the people drop out of the study, but they did not saying that when what happened where like when people discontinue to use the app. For example, an app used in substance use disorder, the common outcome in those studies are the number of days until the last face-to-face therapy session, but they neglect the effect of consistently or persistent use of the app. And only adherence to the use recommendation is reported. When an app offered behavioral recommendations, adherence was often reported only for adherence to the app recommendation or app use instead of other parts of the app use. For example, in contraceptive apps, they require the participants to have a completed reports on sexual activities. But also in the app, it's important for them to track the body temperature and the cycle start information. So they didn't emphasize on those part and how well the participants report those other factors that are logged or tracked by the app. So but those factors will be very helpful for physicians to provide recommendation or inform the consumer's choices. And there are a lot of definitions among the studies about adherence, which limits the potential for a meta-analysis or to even just compare the apps themselves. Like even though they share the same indication, but we don't really have a way to compare different apps because the definition about the compliance or adherence in those trials are so different. And the potential benefits of aligning those matrix can be identify the matrix that are important for a certain treatment area or a certain indication. And also, if everyone work the study under the same framework, it will be easier to compare the usability and efficacy for similar apps or apps with the same indication. So the author recommend FDA guidance or voluntary standards to determine which matrix should be collected and reported when it comes to a software trial. And also, previously, we briefly mentioned about external notification. For example, using email notification in the apps for hyperactivity disorder people. How the app will perform. So there are a discrepancy between clinical trial and the real world, because how will those notifications be carried out in real world? For example, the contraceptive app I used as an example before, they will like they collect sexual activity during the clinical trials, but they do not collect that after they market it. And the user were more likely to follow the instruction from the app because they have this constant behavior of reporting in. And so after that, the marketed app actually updated its function to also collect the sexual activity records. So as for the analysis of efficacy, so we notice that pre-registration is very common for us RCTs, but pre-registration is uncommon for efficacy analysis of us RCTs or observational study. And many articles analyze efficacy with statistically biased method. Few articles reported evidence of meeting the assumptions for the efficacy analysis. So remember the chart, we talked about different analysis for efficacy and whether they meet the 3 assumptions the author looked into. And the thing about pre-registration and the benefit of it is about p-hacking. So p-hacking means that people or researchers trying different ways to analyze their data until they get a desired or expected result. So pre-registration is more common in effectiveness than efficacy. And as we saw in the previous table, and to specify in advance for the case of lower adherence, or how low adherence will be defined. Those things are what the current study didn't show. It's like they don't really tell. Very few study only tell us how low is low adherence. They don't define that before this trial start. And the current conduct is that the current conduct for this issue is that, or a current way to address this issue is we recommend observational study to create or follow a protocol and analysis plan. And FDA also recommends pre-submission to receive authorities' feedback along the way when you are developing an app. So the author thinks that pre-specified plans should include the analytical method used and any threshold for decimizing adherence and which is low and high adherence, and the plan to account for confounders. So the other thing the author talked about in discussion is the confounder selection and a rationale behind this. Very few articles really mention about why they choose this confounder and how this was addressed. And only one trial which generated 2 articles utilized CACE or what we call LAT analysis. So for these 2 analysis, they account for confounders without perfect knowledge of the relationship between them and the outcome. And other things that RCT using per protocol method should consider using this analysis instead. For observational study, confounders should be selected based on a prior knowledge of causal relationship, but there's also the limitation on that. So we should try our best to acknowledge the limitation when it comes to observational study and adjusting it based on the confounders. So the author recommend that regulatory guidance includes how researchers should choose and report confounders for efficacy analysis. So here comes to the conclusion. So the conclusion and recommendation for the author is that appropriate use requires an understanding of how adherence could function as the moderator of outcome. And regulatory guidance should specify choosing adherence matrix and performing efficacy analysis and reports the method they use or pre-register the method they use. And the limitation of this study and the potential future work after this study is that they actually exclude qualitative or exploratory study. So they are something that they are missing out. And also they feel that the proprietary studies for adherence confounder or develop ways to improve the adherence, those were excluded as well. So they didn't consider those the qualitative part of an app, and also how the confounder, maybe there are other research about the confounder that they didn't know. So some studies that might be found with a different protocol were missed. For example, they recommend for future study, they can consider using Digital Therapeutic Alliance product page to identify additional product, not just the FDA database. And there are only a few SAMD, which reflect only a very small portion of the digital health apps that are included in this study. And that's all for me. And welcome any questions or discussion. Thank you so much.